the world-famous Scotch Whisky Heritage Centre in Edinburgh, Scotland?
You know what? I'm surprised at myself that I do not, even though I own quite a bit of property in Scotland, because every time you buy a new bottle of Laphroaig, you get a little sheet of paper that says that you've also bought 1 square foot of property on the Laphroaig grounds. And I've got quite a few square feet.
Wait, is that true? Laphroaig, like, you get a foot of peat moss or something? What do you get?
And that's exactly right. You get 1 square foot of peat moss that is yours. It's all numbered off.
What a treasure!
I don't think I've got any of them that connect yet, but I've got, and they've got like factory tours, and if you go, you can go and visit your land at the Laphroaig property.
How precious! Have you ever smelled peat in person, Brad?
Oh, I love the smell of peat.
Oh, do you?
I love it.
Do you?
It's an earthy. I do. I really do.
Have you ever been to a human waste reprocessing plant? Have you ever? Because to me, that's what peat smells like. I'm like, how lovely. A billion-year-old version of a human waste reprocessing plant. So Gloria and I are in Edinburgh. We're just we're hanging out, we're having fun. But it's we had just hiked. What did they call it? Arthur's Seat, the big mountain that's near Edinburgh.
Yeah.
Delightful hike. It was really lovely, windy as heck. We get back down the mountain. It starts to just downpour rain, as it does in Scotland. It's just pouring rain. So we're like, well, what do we do now? What do we want? You want to just go sit in a pub? And we're like, wait a minute. What is this thing? The Scotch Whisky Heritage Centre. It's a whole museum set up to Scotch whiskey. Let's go check it out, right? So we go in, and there's like one super disaffected gum-chewing teen like running the place, right? Right. Hello. Welcome to the Scotch Whisky Heritage Centre. How many? And we're like, 2, please. And we buy the tickets, and Brad, I swear to God, it's like Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. This little cart comes out, like, go ahead and step in. And Brad, the cart, though, is a whiskey barrel that cracks open, and there's a little seat that reveals, right?
I'm in love.
You sit down in a whiskey barrel car, and you, like Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, you go through the history of Scotch whiskey, and it starts off, and there's this incredible voiceover this whole time, right? Like, the history of Scotch whiskey starts in the peat bogs, and the men and women who worked them and figured out a way to burn them for fuel. And you start off with like, how do you burn peat moss? What's the right way to burn? And then they talk about how they made Scotch whiskey, and then the story gets incredible because it's like, but then the evil redcoats from the south declared no more Scotch whiskey, and there was no Scotch whiskey to be made. And then you see these animatronic villagers like, nay, right? And then you go around a corner on the ride. Remember, you're in a whiskey barrel, and by the way, they're misting the smell of peat bogs at you, right?
Oh my God.
And the delicious smell of peat bogs. I'm like, oh my God, it smells like a human waste reprocessing center. And so you go around the corner, and then they're like, and I don't remember the year. I'm going to fail my Scottish friends, but they're like, but then in the year 1742, the Scottish drove back the redcoats and reclaimed the right to make Scottish whiskey. And I swear to God, Brad, I swear on everything that I love, that the two animatronics is an 80-year-old man and an 8-year-old boy, and they're both holding a little thing of Scotch whiskey in their hands, and they're going,
my God.
I'll drink to that. I'll drink to that. I'll drink to that. And they're like clinking their little cups. But it's an 8-year-old boy drinking Scotch whiskey. And Gloria and I are like, what the hell? So we get out of the ride and we're like, what was that? That was the weirdest thing. Someone took Disney and just took a Disney ride and like overlaid it on the production of Scotch whiskey. And we get out, and then there's like a little like tasting table, right? So there's like Glenfiddich, Glenmorangie, Laphroaig, all the different Scottish whiskeys. Yeah. But it's 10 a.m. in the morning, Brad. Like we're not ready for Scotch whiskey. And it's it's the same disaffected teen, like, 2 nose earrings, and she's like, right, here's your free selection of Scotch whiskey. And we're like, oh God, no thanks. It's 10 a.m. We had a really big Scottish breakfast, no thanks. And she looks at us, she goes, you're not going to drink it. And we're like, oh no, it's again 10 a.m. Not gonna drink it. She's like, and keep in mind, this is in the days before cameras were ubiquitous and everywhere. She's like, she goes, Right, do you mind if I have it? Like, it's 10 a.m. And she goes, and throws them all down. And we're like, man, ought to be a teen working in the Scotch Whiskey Heritage Center, Brad. Oh my God.
Do you never fail to sign up for the morning shift? All these Americans coming in who are like, no, I can't drink in the morning. And
I can't have that much scotch in the morning. It's 10 a.m.
Yeah, exit through the gift shop. I'll be over here day drinking.
And then meanwhile, the 8-year-old boy animatronic is coming up from the right. Right, do you mind if I have a little bit too? I'll drink to that. And on that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about Scotch whiskey and making comics.
And working on your day fade and making a living from comics, I'm Brad Guigar, the author of the Webcomics Handbook and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's hour of comics advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk print publishing.
Let's talk print publishing, my friend. We've got a whole big conversation we want to jump into this week based on a really interesting result coming out of the Penguin Random House court trial. And before I do any of that, though, I want to mention you could be watching the show live right now with our Live Gab friends over at patreon.com/comiclab. They are joining us right now, and there is a concurrent chat happening. And the show, in case you have to miss it, and the live recording, it is recorded and archived for you in case you need to step away for life, love, or learning. And then, so Bradley, what is our topic for this week? The big one that we want to jump into. We've championed at the bit for this one.
Yeah, we've been. Dave and I have been doing this show on our phones for the last weekend because this came out, and we've been on the phone back and forth to each other, just and what about this, and what about that, and what about this, and what about that. Dave, I got to figure, unless you were really not paying attention at all, if you had any comics people at all on your social media feed, you saw this tweet from April Henry Books that says the following, quote, OMG, in the Penguin Random House S&S antitrust trial, it was revealed that out of 58,000 trade titles published per year, half of those titles sell fewer than 12 books, less than 12 books. She continues by saying 90% of the titles sell fewer than 2,000 units. Now, as this went on, they brought in somebody that's considered to be a very much an expert in this regard, and that is Jane Friedman over at Jane Friedman on Twitter. Yeah,
and on Instagram. Yep.
And Jane went on, and you can go in, and I very much suggest you take a look at her Twitter and read her thoughts on this, because she really goes deep on this. We're not going to go that far into the weeds ourselves, but there's one takeaway. She said that dozen statistic may not be super fair once you take into account the big picture, and that it may have been a subset of data. Don't get carried away about it. But Jane says that one statistic that she does consider to be fair is that 90% of books published, and these are print published, we're not talking ebooks here, 90% of the print books published by trade publications by print publishers sell under 2,000 units.
Yes. Yeah. Tracking by NPD Bookscan. Yes. Yeah. And so much like the experts in the field, neither Brad or I want to focus in so much on the 12 books a year sold statistics, as that seems to be a little dubious. You're never 100% sure if it includes ebooks, audiobooks sold, super old titles from 1942 that are still in print in some back warehouse. But we very much want to focus in on this 90% of books sold sell less than 2,000 copies, because it reinforces for us what in data coming out in a legally quantifiable way in a court case, what we've heard through the grapevine, which is it's just not the Valhalla that you think it is in the publishing world. That usually you get your advance and you never see anything after that, because there's just not enough money from the sales to either pay off the advance or pay off the advance such that you would continue to get money from each book sold as your contract would stipulate. which for between you, me, and the wall, at best is $2 a book. At worst, on average, is about $1 a book from most every book contract that I've heard from a big publisher. So let's say you got, by the way, you're not going to get this in cartooning. You got an $80,000 advance on your cartooning. The average person's not going to get that. And you work for a year, 2 years on that book. It publishes. It's sold great, but it never sold enough such you get any other money off of it. So you better hope that advance paid for the year, the 2 years that it took you to make that book, because you're never going to see another dime or a red cent after that. Don't you think, Brad?
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons that it's one of the sub-themes on this show. In other words, it's something that we talk about week after week after week. And that is self-publishing really is not only a valid option, but in some cases, it's the downright logical option. Yes. The only caveat I make there is for children's book publishing, where I still think print publishers have kind of the inside track. When you go into like the scholastic book fairs and stuff like that, they really, and the way that those books are purchased very often by parents for their children, they very much have the inside track. I wouldn't, if I was doing a children's book, I wouldn't hesitate to use a publisher. But for all other instances, you bet your boots. This is why we're telling you the importance of learning self-publishing. Yeah, and then just for my own clarification, I personally would extend that to YA books as well, not just children's, but YA. Would you extend that, Brad? Do you think to YA as well? Yes. In my mind, I had them both under the same umbrella, but you are smart to make that distinction.
I think both Brad and I would say any book that a parent or that an educator would be involved in the purchase or getting that book, I think that it's better to go with a publisher. But yes, so why do we think that it's better to go self-publishing? Well, I'll tell you especially the route we do. It's when you own and control your own books, you can move hell or high water if you are motivated enough. Versus a marketing team that you hope is doing the work, but we see the results from the court case. Sometimes they're doing their best with the 2 people they have on staff for this quarter to push these 19 books that they're trying to get out. And so I personally feel like I know and trust myself at this point far more than I would trust a publisher to get the word out to my readership that I've already built, to get these books in their hands. I wouldn't trust a marketing team to do it at this point. Yeah, I disagree. I disagree. And I'll tell you why. You're being too nice. You're being too nice because I know just from talking to people and just from paying attention that the first thing a publisher looks for if they're thinking about signing a new artist or a new author, first thing they look for is that person's social media reach. Yeah. Why? Because they expect that creator, that author or artist, to do some, or in some cases, all of the heavy lifting when it comes to promoting that book. That's true. That's why that's why we see so many celebrities signing book deals, because they're counting on that social media reach. Now, that's all well and good, but the reasons that publishers traditionally took such a large chunk of the profits from a book is that 40, 50 years ago, they were the only ones that had the means to do all of this. They were the only ones that could do distributing. They were the only ones, by and large, that could do printing. Right. They were the only ones that could get your book into a retail store. They were the only ones that could do marketing. They were the game in town. Yeah, that's it. Yes, they were the game. And today, in the year 2022, you can do all of those things, not only just as well, in some cases, right on par with the publishers. Yeah. Because let's face it, let's be honest with each other. It's all Amazon. It's all Amazon.com. And you can do that, covers distributing. You can absolutely do printing on your own. You can deal with printers on your own. And let's face it, if the publisher is going to be counting on you to do the marketing with your social media, why are you doing that for them for free? Right. I swear to God, you could not get me to sign a publishing contract if you put a gun to my head. But if you ever had that gun to my head and you were making me sign, you better believe that there would be a whole section that said that I get more money if you expect me to go out there and promote this book.
Well, the whole reason I'm only getting $1 a book is because in the old days, 40 or 50 years ago, I was just doing the one part of that book. Now I'm going to do marketing too, but not get paid for it. So I think you're being very nice in the way you're describing that. But I think for me, it does not add up. And it always gets me a little bit angry that authors and artists are expected to carry the water when it comes to marketing and promotion.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, you are right. You're right. You're absolutely right. It frustrates me when I see our friends that have to go out, and you can just tell based on the marketing from the company that they're the ones doing the heavy lifting with, if they've got 10,000 or 100,000 or 200,000, followers on Twitter, Instagram, or whatever, that's the expectation, is that no, you're going to do the heavy lifting. We're going to do some trade shows, and we'll be at ALA, which is the Library Association. We'll be at all those shows. Well, great. That's a whoop-de-doo. But I seem to be doing all the heavy promo in terms of sort of spent advertising, as it were.
Right.
And so I don't know. For me, it reinforces that by hook or by crook, because I don't want to say that we were some geniuses, that we saw this coming and we saw that this was the way to go. At first, we fell into it because it was the only option, if we're being honest about it, right? It's not like we're some vast, economic genius. We're like, this is how it's going to go down. It just so happens, though, that the path that we have carved out for ourselves turns out to, in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases, be better for the average cartoonist. It's just a better way to live a life, and a better way to control your life, and to have a steady, recurring, controllable income source between Patreon, between Kickstarter, between owning and controlling your own website and book sales, and having direct-to-consumer sales on a continuing basis, and that shows, for those that do it. It just seems to be a better way to do it, because if we're honest about it, the book model is much like the music album model, or a lot of other businesses, where 10% of titles actually cover most of the costs of that publishing company for the rest of the 90% of the titles. The Stephen Kings carry the weight, or carry the water rather, for a lot of flops that come out from that publisher. And so I know where I would be in that stack. I would be in the 2,000 to 4,000 range, and that's it. That would be what I would get for that publisher, and it would be a middling existence where I'd probably have to have a second job. Honestly, I don't think I would make enough money in my career. I would probably make the majority of my money from cartooning if I was with a publisher, but I wouldn't make all of it. I would have to take more commission work. I'd have to take more advertising work. I'd have to take more work for hire, and then every 2 years I'd have this big advance from a publisher that I would never see additional money from. But frankly, I don't even know if it would be that big. I've seen some of the advances for some of our friends, and it's not what you want it to be for someone, to make the next year or 2 years possible.
Meanwhile, since a lot of these numbers are public, and since we talked before the show about your comfort level in sharing them, let's just talk about your recent Kickstarter. Take a look, and here I'm gonna peg this on that one statistic that Jane Friedman, who's an expert on this, said that that was the most fair of all of the statistics. That 90% of print published books sell under 2,000 copies. Now, your Kickstarter just went over Anatomy of Dinosaurs just a few weeks ago. And you're basically covered 1,000 books. In other words, you're going to be shipping out 1,000 books through that Kickstarter. Right? Yep. You're going to be printing 2,000. And it's very important to note that at this point in time, you have not spent one red cent. No. You haven't spent any money of your own.
No.
You put that out there. Right now, those books are being printed and produced. They're going to be shipped to your house. You're going to be packaging the first 1,000 out and sending out to your Kickstarter backers. Then, and this is important, you will have 1,000 books to warehouse and to sell on your website, any show appearances you go to. You'll have 1,000 books that you're not going to get $1 a book on. Every time you sell one of those books, it will be 100% profit. The only thing you're going to lose out on maybe is shipping, if you don't have shipping extra in your online store, right? Or if you sell them through Amazon, you're going to sell them for whatever their deal is, 60 or 65% off the cover price. But everything that you sell from that point on is pure profit. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that you stand to sell better as soon as you sell your 2001st book. All right.
Right.
Or let's not even go there. Let's say you just sell 2000 by the skin of your teeth, right?
Right.
You sell 2000, you're doing as well as 10%, right? Those 90% you just left in the dust. You're in that 10 percentile of publishing at that point.
Right.
And you've made a better living in the process because, like you point out, as you're doing this, you're also doing Patreon and so on and so forth. And just to bring this into view, are you comfortable sharing how many of your Kickstarted books have gone out of print because you sold every last darn book?
Oh, if I, out of 15, 18 books that I've done, I think, and I might be wrong about this, but somewhere in the 3 to 6 book range have gone out of print. Well, coffee's gone out of print, literature's gone out of print. Pop culture's now out of print. Yeah, I would say about five or six books. I'm not, I don't have that ready, but yeah, let's say 5 or 6 at this point. Yes.
And by the way, you still have all the rights to that. So if you wanted to repackage those,
still sold as ebooks, ebooks,
Yes.
Exactly.
And if you wanted to, you could bring them back out, or you could combine coffee and pop culture into a big heart. You've got 1,001 ways to repackage that as you go on. You're just in a much better position to control your career as a self-publisher.
And keep in mind too, because this is not a small thing. As I'm creating that book, I am sharing it along the way on Patreon, something that a publisher would not allow me to do. No. They would have it locked down. You're not allowed, any leaks that you show, any like previews would have to be approved. It would have to be approved like way ahead of time in a sort of 2-month scale. And then, they would knock it around by email to 17 different executives and say like, all right, you can share this one image. And it would drive me nuts as a cartoonist because I love the process of sharing. It's energizing for the process. It's also course correcting because I can see along the way little things that are triggering or not triggering or working or not working.
Yeah. And you're learning.
And I'm learning as I go.
Time.
So my Patreons and my public sharing of comics. So in the meantime, my heart is happier as I'm creating. I'm not like one of those cartoonists that's by themselves like, I hope people like this. Can't wait to share it with you guys. You know how we always hear this? Oh, it's coming along great. Can't wait to share it. Can't wait for you to see it in 2 years. I'm going to be so excited in 2 years to share this with you. I hate that. If I draw a thing, I want to share it right now. It literally is the happiest part of my life is I'm like a 9-year-old that wants to hold up the piece of paper to someone nearby in the room and go, look what I drew. I'm not kidding. That is a source of joy in my life. So what I'm getting at there is it's not only financially better because I've got the Patreon going in the meantime until the Kickstarter goes, but it's good emotionally in that I can share it. I can learn from my audience. I can have that back and forth that actually endears me to them and they to I, so that we can have a better bond as reader and audience, or artist and audience. So I just find it to be a better way to work. I really do. Yeah. And like as Brad said, the margins are so much better. I mean, you take a $30 book that I can sell, that I know by pure accounting rules, the cost of goods sold would have to be accounted for in even that extra 1,000. But between you, me, and the wall, it's sort of cash in the wallet versus cash out of the wallet accounting system. Yeah. And those books are long since paid for. So it's just $30 pure profit for those last 1,000 that are going to sell, right? And in the meantime, I've got 10 other copies that are also of different books in Sheldon and Drive that are selling from years past. So it's a lovely way to make a business. It really is. I enjoy it versus having to put it over into the hands of people that I don't necessarily trust to do work that I don't necessarily think is going to get done. In a window that's limited, by the way. We should talk about that. Dave Kellett can continue to talk about a book that I made 6 years ago with all the same energy that I talk about my newest book. No way Penguin Random House or anybody else is going to be like a big push for Brad Geiger's book that he did 6 years ago. No, they're going to push the book that's coming out this quarter, and so it's just, I just find it to be a better way to work.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, it's a really good underlying theme of this show. It is always that this is the way to go. Self-publishing is something that you should be strongly considering. Yeah. Again, except in very special cases, this is something that, frankly, you kind of need to learn. Yeah. Something you need to be paying very, very close attention to. And this is exactly why, right? And
Right.
again,
Exactly. Yeah.
this is all of that. I feel comfortable. It's just making that statement. And then just beyond that, I mean, then it comes down to how are you built as an artist? How are you built as a creator?
Right.
Because I'm in the same vein as you, Dave. All of the things you said are true. Plus, now what happens when the editor says, oh, I think we should be doing your book a little bit differently. I think this character should be this, and that character should be that. And now you've got to put your trust into somebody who, listen, I'm not, I can't pretend to be a better person than I am. You've heard me for what, 250 some shows. I couldn't lie to you if I wanted. My first thought is talking to an editor. What have you done? What have you done? What have you created that gives you the impetus, that gives you the right to talk to me? As amazing as I am, right? And yeah, that's probably a really horrible way to make decisions. But that's my first response. If somebody's going to start telling me how to do Evil Inc., really? Show me what you've done. Show me what you've done, and then we'll talk.
You know, I often exhibit my nice side. I'll tell you this: when someone gives me notes, oh boy, does it trigger my smallness. I'm like, never do I feel more egotistical than when someone tries to give me notes, and then I'm like, listen, all right, let's slow it down here. I know what I'm doing, because Even let's be honest, if I give Brad notes, or if Brad gives me notes, even a friend that we trust and love, we're like, all right there, Sugar Plum. You sit down there, Dave Kellett. I'm Brad Guigar. I know what I'm doing. And I know the reverse is true. And this is two friends that love and respect each other. And so if a reader or an editor or somebody else comes to us, I'm like, that immediately triggers a whole different response. So I know that I would not work better with an editor, because I know what I want to do. I know what I'm trying to achieve. I know the tools I need to do to get there in terms of the steps in the storytelling. And I'll just be honest, there's a small enough ego in me that I think I'm smarter than the average bear in terms of what I'm trying to do. And an editor who has never created comics before, I'm probably not going to listen to him on average. Don't get me wrong. There are great comics editors out there. There are great comics publishers out there. There are great comics agents out there. I don't know that I would ever link up with them. And if I did, I might and probably would listen to them. The odds of me linking up with a bad editor are far higher, and I probably wouldn't listen to them.
Well, and it comes down to this. It comes down to choice, right? I mean, if you ask me for notes, I'll give you notes, and that's a smooth process. Same in reverse. We've often, especially like when we were writing something, I'll call you and say, "Hey, I need a joke for this. I need a joke pitch." You know, we'll give each other notes on that way. And for me, it's the same way with an editor, right? If I voluntarily reached out to someone who I thought had good credentials, that's a completely different situation, right? But in a publishing structure, you may not have that choice. It might be, hey, here's the editor you're working with today, right? And it might be because the editor you were working with yesterday isn't there anymore for any number of reasons.
Brad, I'd like to introduce you to Greg. He used to do cookbooks. Now he's your new editor on. And because we had huge layoffs, by the way. So he's now overseeing 50 books that he's never done before.
Yeah. And as much as we all revere Stan Lee, let's not forget that he got his first step into publishing because he was the son-in-law or nephew-in-law of was it Martin Goodman? He was put in there because he was somebody's kid.
Good old nepotism, yeah. So
I mean, to expect that stuff has disappeared is silly.
So where does this all leave us? I mean, for the average person, here's the good news. It's not like you're going to have a choice in it anyway. You might as well go self-publishing, because the average publishers are they're as is rightly their case to do, are looking for the hits, you know. And to be fair, if you are one of the Raina Telgemeyers of the world, if you are one of the big hits, it is still a better option, as we said, to go with a publisher. But if you're the 90%, and I think I would include myself in there, that would probably fall around the 2,000 books sold range, my God, it is a much happier life and a more financially secure life to be a self-publisher than it is to go with the big publishers. And I think being self-aware enough to say, no, I know I will probably never get above blankety blank 1,000 number of copies sold, and I won't. I will live a better life, Dave Kellett, as a self-published author than I ever would going for the vanity push of being with a publisher, but selling for less dollars at the end of the day, working under an editor, making changes that I wouldn't want to make, being pushed in a way that I might not necessarily agree with from their marketing department, and ultimately living a less satisfying life. Don't you think, Brad?
I agree 100%. It's something that if you're on the fence, this is the day to start taking self-publishing a little bit more seriously.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
So, Brad, a quick update from the show from San Diego Comic-Con. I think people will find this interesting and funny because I sure did. So if you remember, Brad, we talked about the layout for San Diego Comic-Con. I was surrounded by like 3 or 4 NFT booths, like comics and NFTs. They're a marriage made in heaven. Or, hey, you got comics, we got NFTs. Or, hey, we're selling you NFTs. And right about the time Comic-Con was about to launch, do you remember the floor fell out from the NFT market? Like everybody realized that it was being operated under a greater fool theory and that the money was all shell game and it was ridiculous. It felt like a multi-level marketing thing. So everyone like abandoned NFTs real quick, but they had already paid for the booth, so they still had to go, right? And so I'm working my booth, and it's kind of a lull moment. They happen every once in a while, and other people from other booths will come up. And this very kind woman comes up, introduces herself. We'll just say her name is Susie, right? Hi, I'm Susie. I'm from the feature. We're over at 2 booths over. And Dave, have you heard about NFTs? And I'm like, yes, I have heard about NFTs. Have you heard what they're doing to the comics market and all the amazing? Yes, I've heard, Susie. Thank you very much. Here's a card. Here's a flyer. I can't wait to talk to you more about NFTs. You don't have to. I'm really not interested in NFTs. Thanks so much. Anyway, leave it there. I never put another thought to it. But Brad, then this email comes in a couple weeks later, okay?
Shall we do a dramatic reading? I'll be Susie.
Well, yes, let's do it. Let's do it as a dramatic reading if you would. Brad, if you'll read for the part of Susie, I'll read on the part of Dave Kellett, okay?
August 22nd, 2022 at 11:15 a.m. Dear Dave, it was great to be introduced to your work at Comic-Con. I'm working with The Feature, a Web3 studio powering the future of entertainment across metadata and traditional media. We're partnering with the world's best creators, brands and companies to challenge the entertainment industry to forge a better path for sharing creative work in the world. We see an opportunity to help creatives hype their products and make money through NFT merchandising and by connecting them directly to buyers and producers.
August 22nd, 2022, 9 minutes later. Hi, Susie. You can take me off your mailing list. Thanks, Dave.
September 1st, 2022 at 10 o'clock in the morning. Thank you for writing me at The Feature. As of September 1st, 2022, the Feature is no longer seeking submissions at this time. Consequently, I'm I guess I'm no longer working there.
Brad, that was a 9-day cycle from the biggest hyperbole to, well, looks like we're closing up shop and I'm no longer working at The Feature. Thank you for emailing me.
I guess we really did have the world's best creators, brands, and companies, but maybe I thought we were forging a better path. We were out there foraging. I was foraging. Now I'm foraging, but. In a trash bin.
We were minting so many NFTs. It was amazing. For a golden moment, Brad, we had found Valhalla and all its beautiful halls were bright and shining. Brad, now I've been kicked out of Valhalla because we're folding. We're folding, Brad.
Oh, well, it was fun while it lasted, Dave, but unfortunately, it sounds like they're not going to be accepting any more submissions at this time.
I just want to remind because God, it's so wonderful when we very early on called it. We're like, look, this is hucksterism, and if NFTs, it just feels wrong, it looks wrong, it smells wrong, and we got more than a few emails from Brad from reader or listeners that were like, you guys are old and just don't get it. NFTs are the future. That's where the money. Oh, sit down before you fall down, old man. NFTs are the future. We're like, listen, we've seen a version of this hucksterism before.
Yeah.
Just trust us. And they're like, nah. Anyway, 9 days that cycle from the biggest hyperbolic email to, well, looks like we're closing up shop and I'm out of a job.
Yep.
I'm not laughing at this individual's misfortune because of God. No, well, not that at all. What I am chuckling at is just the roller coaster ride of the biggest hyperboles that are in NFTs to turning into a tumbleweed blowing past. It couldn't have happened quicker and in a turnaround of 9 days in those emails.
Yeah. Well, Dave, we've got a question and it fits so well in today's show that I couldn't not put it at the very top of the list. Okay. And here it is, comes from one of our Patreon community members, Dave, who says, what are the downsides and disadvantages to self-publishing, being your own boss, etc.? And I thought, having just spent the first half hour of the show talking about, hey, this is why we encourage you to take self-publishing seriously, we would be remiss if we didn't say, hey, this is not exactly a walk in the park. There are downsides to self-publishing that you need to be aware of and need to be prepared for as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. It is not some golden walk in the park where there's like a, little Cinderella type bluebirds landing on my shoulder. Mm-hmm. So here's the thing. If I'm being honest about it, I think some of the downsides to talk about are to make this business model work. It's very hard to do in a 1-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn or in Chicago or in Dallas. You need physical space somewhere in your life to store these physical items that you can sell either through Amazon Advantage or your own website or your Kickstarter, right? It needs to be, at the very least, you need some temporary space to rent so that you can route the shipment from your publisher, package them all up, and get all those Kickstarted books out into the world. Even if you just do that, if you order the exact amount of books that you Kickstarted for and you ship them out, you're going to need to rent some space to pack and ship it. But in the case of when you're building for longer term success, like with Anatomy of Dinosaurs, ordering extras so that I can sell them in the years ahead, that requires long-term physical storage space. I live in Los Angeles. I have access to comparatively cheap and easy storage. No problem at all. Brad has a cheap and easy storage in Philadelphia. But there are, let's just be honest about it, there are lifestyles, whether you're in downtown London, you're in downtown New York, you're in downtown Chicago, you've got a 1-bedroom bachelorette looking apartment, and you don't have a ton of space. It's hard. That's a real downside to it. Another one is, I would think, Brad, is just that you are owning and controlling your own business, but that means you're also owning and controlling all the mistakes. Yep. And especially early on, certain mistakes can be catastrophic. Like if my first, say, 3 books weren't a success, it would have been a serious crimp on whether I could ever have done a 4th book. So I think the necessary part of having to be the one making all the decisions and making those decisions pay off is a tricky one for a lot of people. And
it means that you're taking all the risks too, right? And we've talked about some of those risks. For me, I try not to start a Kickstarter too late in the year because I'm really scared of something hiccuping and I'm carrying that money across December 31st, at which point I have to take taxes on it, right? And that comes out in the
without
wash
any
in
expenses, you mean?
You that comes out in the wash in a 2-year cycle, but in that 1 year, you're kind of over the barrel. But also this, we all kind of really flock to webcomics and self-publishing and independent comics because no more gatekeepers, right? And that's the one thing that we really celebrate about indie comics. No more gatekeepers. The only thing is that there was, and I'm almost surprised to hear myself say it, there was one good thing about gatekeepers, is that if you took a product that was not ready for prime time, if you took a product that just wasn't there yet, if your writing wasn't there, if the art wasn't there, A publisher could tell you no. And at that point in time, 50 years ago, that was pretty much all there was to it, right? You could believe in your heart that they were wrong, but it was pretty much, well, these people, know what they're doing, whether that was right or wrong. That was it. And then you went back and you either gave up completely or you rededicated yourself and you said, okay, these are the things I've got to learn. These are the things I've got to improve. One of the biggest problems with self-publishing is that structure does not exist. And getting somebody to understand that they're not ready yet is actually surprisingly difficult because everybody's convinced that their stuff is amazing and the world just doesn't see it yet, right? It's part of the reason that we always say that everything you need to know about crowdfunding comes in the word. First comes the crowd, then comes the funding. It's to remind you that you have to put something out into the world that is generating at least a significant amount of support. That either it's a large number of people, period, or it's a smaller number of people who have a large amount of passion. Remember, we always talk about measuring people and passion. That's the reason that we go back to those themes on this show time and time again, because it's very easy for someone to not understand that they're just not ready yet. And they've got to go back and improve certain things about their work. And by the way, if you want to see, I'll point a finger right now. I'll tell you exactly a great example of this. This guy right here, Brad Guigar, doing Greystone Inn for 4.5 years. It was a good learning experience, but Brad Guigar was convinced that comic was ready for prime time, right? It wasn't until I got kicked on my butt several times, and I had to keep getting my my butt handed to me. And I always tell the story about watching people go by unable to get them to slow down at Toronto Comic-Con and finally realizing, geez, this really isn't working. The problem is, I know people who are out there doing this for 10, 20, even somebody reached out to me on Facebook, has a buddy that's been doing it for 30 years and just doesn't see that this thing isn't catching. The real danger in self-publishing is self-delusion. Doing this thing. And by the way, the only reason I can say that is you're looking to the king of the delusioned people right here. I've been there. I know it. Right. If somebody would have come to me in the early years in 2003, somebody would have come to me, Dave, and said, Brad, you need to work on your writing. You need to work on all these things. Just pop, 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 pop. I would have looked at that person and I would have said, you don't understand. People are reading this comic. People are buying the books. People come up to me at comic convention and they're talking about the characters and the storyline. This is a big success. And by the way, all those things were true. All those things were very true. But here's the other thing that was true. I could have done Greystone Inn to 100% efficiency, 100% maximum Greystone Inn. I could have never been a full-time cartoonist. That title, written the way it was, drawn the way it was, produced the way it was, even if I had done it at its maximum, I could have never made the leap because there were so many other things wrong with it. It had an opaque concept. It had terrible character designs. There's a list a mile long of things that was wrong with that comic. I go back to it still. Some of those jokes stand up. Every now and again, this blind squirrel found an acorn. It happened. It happened every now and again. I'll read an old Greystone Inn comic that makes me laugh. And I'm like, you know what? Every now and again, you hit a dinger. But I could have never made that transition. And it's very easy to get caught up in that self-delusion.
Yeah. And so let me course correct from what earlier Dave said, which is I was like, I don't want to work with a publisher. I don't want to work with an editor. I don't like it when people give me notes. Here's the flip side to that, which is I'm partially smart enough to have found a way towards self-editorializing, that I got better at deciding what worked, what wasn't working, what was resonating. But there was, like Brad, I will tell on myself, there was many a year where I was walking down the wrong path, and I would have benefited from a smart editor saying, if you just do X, Y, and Z, this will be better, right? Yes. And so that's one of the downsides for self-publishing, is that I have found a lot of people that are among the best artists in the world have a weird insecurity and imposter syndrome, and they don't have the ability to promote themselves or believe in themselves because for all the myriad reasons of human existence, they don't have the security in their heart to say, no, I'm great and I'm doing great work. The flip side of that is I have seen some of the least talented cartoonists in the world have the most bravura and like, look at me world, I'm ready to shine. And you're like, well, maybe take another 5 to 10 years and get some work done. And you're not quite there yet. It is one of the unfortunate truths of the world. And an editor, a good publisher in a traditional system that might have existed 50 years ago could have course corrected both of those people. You would take the true talent and be able to say, no, look, you're going out on a book tour because you are good and these people want to hear from you and your fans love you. And you would tell the one that's not so good, sorry, we're not quite ready for this title yet. Check back in with us in a couple of years. And so yes, there is value in an editor for that. I just don't think, for me, again, I don't think the payoffs are worth it in terms of what that would bring me at this point in my career. But for some artists, I have to be willing to acknowledge that a good editor with a good eye can course correct a lot of artists that could need it, both for the good and the bad in terms of where they're standing on their career.
It is funny. So many of us fall either into imposter syndrome or Dunning-Kruger. It's so hard so hard to find that middle ground that you're not in either, and it's scary. But in terms of other kinds of disadvantages or downsides to self-publishing. And I've said this sentence many times to family members who just don't get it or don't understand. We had family visiting us not so long ago, and I had taken a little bit of time Saturday because I needed to work on the comic. And this very nice person said, "You meant you were working on the weekend? How come you do that?" And I said, "That's the real big problem with being self-employed. A lot of times you work for a real jerk." And
it's true.
And it just so happened I needed to get that done. It needed to get done. There was other things I'd like to do on a Saturday, but I needed to do that. And so it needs to get done. And being self-employed takes, along with battling the self-delusion, it also means having to have an awful lot, a tremendous amount of self-discipline.
Yeah. Well, and let me marry to that point because there's also the question of wearing many hats. And I love wearing many hats. I love that I get to do my marketing, my graphic design, my book production, my website stuff. I get to do the appearances of the conventions. I get to do making different kinds of merch. I've done stuff in metal, in magnets, in pins, in prints, in posters, and postcards. I've made all sorts of different merch, and I've worn all sorts of different hats. I love that, right? Yeah. There is a big disadvantage if you don't want to do all that. If you just want to be a cartoonist. I get that. I understand. For me, I literally feel like when I get to my deathbed, I will have kind of lived multiple lives because I got to wear all these different hats, right? I got to have a taste of what it is to be a marketer or what it is to be a publisher or an advertiser or a convention, salesperson, because I kind of got to wear all those different hats. And isn't that wonderful that in my one life, I lived like 17 different lives. And so I find it a personal advantage and a thing that I enjoy. Because I also think it makes me a better writer, by the way, because I get to get little slices of many different lives, the sort of peek into what it's like to be a shoe salesman or a car salesman or this or that, right? But I do understand that for a lot of personalities, some days even my personality, I'm like, I don't want to wear all these hats. I just want to be a cartoonist. Yeah. And I do get that. That is a disadvantage because for a brief window in 20th century publishing, you could be just the thing, right?
Yes.
But you look at any other window in publishing, it's not like William Hogarth didn't have to market his own pamphlets around London. Yep. You kind of, every other window in cartooning from Gilray and Hogarth on, you kind of had to be your own person schlepping around your stuff, Everybody from Jeff Smith driving around Bone in the backseat of his car it's only a brief idolized window of certain types of cartoonists. The Mort Walkers, the Charles Schultz only had to be a cartoonist, right? Yeah. But the vast majority of us throughout human history have had to wear those many hats. So anyway, it's kind of a give and a take there, but I do see it as a disadvantage. Yes.
And I'll just answer the next question that we're going to get sent in before you send it in, because having said all that, I know the next question that we get. And that is, what if you're one of those people who just want to be a cartoonist? What if you don't want to do marketing? What if you don't want to do publishing? What if you don't want to pay estimated taxes? I'm going to tell you the honest, and you tell me if I'm wrong, Dave. It's going to sound harsh, but I believe in ripping the Band-Aid off. I think you're kind of screwed.
Statistically, yes, you're kind of screwed. Statistically, yes.
Yes, you can go out and find companies that say that they will do your marketing for you, right? Mm-hmm. Have I ever found one that didn't scream out that it was a scam to me, whether I was making an accurate judgment or not? No. Was there one that I ever trusted as somebody saying, oh, well, you can hire us and we'll do your social media for you. You can hire us. We'll do your marketing for you. Even bringing somebody aboard as a business manager is a very, very, you got to really, really vet type of person. Oh boy, I mean, listen, we all look at the sparkling tale of Robert Koo coming to the Penny Arcade guys and saying, basically, I'll work for free until you see what I'm able to do, and then we'll take this thing. And next thing you know, they're the biggest thing in webcomics, and now we've got Penny Arcade conventions all over the map. That's like the sparkling tale. I don't know that happens very often in independent comics. I just don't think it does. And so if you're somebody who's out there saying, but I don't want to do all that, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know that there's another path for you. Your other path is publishing, and we covered that in the first half of the show.
Yeah. And that's why, if you are convinced that you've got Dogman on your hands, or if you've got Raina's Smile on your hands, then go with God, go with the publisher. Yes. I honestly don't think for the vast statistical majority of cartoonists that publishing is a better path than self-publishing. And so will it require falls and knee scrapes as you learn to wear those many hats? Yes, absolutely. Will it give you a better quality of life, a happier life, and probably a longer career in cartooning where you only have to be a cartoonist and you don't have to be working in advertising or at Walmart or something like that? Because that's the flip side, by the way, that people don't talk about. Yes, you can go with a publisher. I kind of guarantee you're going to have to get a second job or commission work or advertising work or something on the side. So you're still going to have to wear other hats, And so do I have to wear many hats as a self-publisher, as a cartoonist? Yes, absolutely. Do other cartoonists that I know that have taken publishing contracts have to take a bunch of for hire work? Absolutely. Do we all sort of tell ourselves that ours is the best path? Yes, we do. Both friends that are published and both myself that is self-published, we tell ourselves that it's the better path. Yeah. But in my heart of hearts, I do believe that because when I'm marketing for Dave Kellett. When I'm doing sales, I'm doing sales for Dave Kellett. When I'm working on how to figure out the publishing things for certain books, I'm doing the publishing for Dave Kellett. Yes. That to me seems like a really rewarding thing and is synergistic. I can make them all work together versus anyway. Long story short, as much as there are disadvantages, and there are, I think that I'm much happier for having walked that path.
You had a moment of brilliance there, and I just want to underline it just for a second, because it's the first time I've heard it put that way, and holy cats, my head just about exploded. What you said was, you're going to end up wearing different hats one way or the other. Why don't you just choose your hats? You're either going to be a self-publisher and wear a bunch of hats, or you're going to be somebody who has to have a day job or a side job, and you're going to have to wear all those hats. One way or another, you're going to be wearing hats.
Yeah, you are.
You don't get to not wear hats. Very few people get to walk through this life and just wear one or two hats.
No.
But this is a way that you can choose your hats.
Control. Yeah, exactly. How many friends do we know, Brad, that are quote unquote published, but they're also, I don't know, they're also doing consultant work for an advertising company, or they're also doing a professorship at SCAD for sequential art, or they're also doing this or that, right? And so, yes, they're published, but they're still wearing multiple hats to try to make it all work. And listen, that's fine. I'm not poo-pooing that. We're all trying to make our lives work together financially and time-wise and schedule-wise. I get it. This is a struggle that's eternal for all of us. But I'm just saying that when you choose a self-publishing route, you can both control your hours, you can control your focus, you can control the hats that you put on and the hats that are needed to be put on. And I find it to be a really rewarding lifestyle, disadvantages and all, warts and all, for my own cartooning. Well, Brad, moving on to another question over at patreon.com/ComicLab. We actually have two questions that I'm going to read consecutively here because they're kind of similar. One from Mark Ashworth, the first question, and the second from Sarah Hedges. And Mark writes, recently I've seen the number of cartoonists making audio plays or audiobooks based on their stories go up from 0 to maybe 3. That isn't a sudden or massive change, but I'm curious to know if you have any thoughts on audio plays, audiobooks, that sort of thing. So that's from Mark. And then Sarah writes, hey, Brad and Dave, I had a question regarding advertising your comic on places like TikTok or with Instagram switching to be more video friendly and away from static images. Could you do a voiceover for the preview comic page or the short form or on the short form video website? Do you think that would bring in more viewers, or is it not worth the trouble? So two similar but different questions about basically bringing voice to comics. The first one, Brad, let's tackle Mark's first. Audiobooks, audio plays, reading it maybe in a radio play style.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I've got lots of thoughts. And I group these both together because they've got a common theme, and that is taking your comic and doing something else with it, either to do it for merchandise or to do it for advertising, or I guess more accurately, it's not advertising, it's promotion, right?
Yeah.
And it's taking one creative thing and morphing it over into another thing. And I've got the same advice for both things, and that is this. Doing those things, doing audiobooks and doing motion video for to a certain extent, and especially when you're talking about adding voiceovers and stuff, that's a whole nother vocation. That's a whole nother skill set. It's a whole thing that you've got to learn. And in the same way that we've been saying all throughout the show that you wear many hats and so forth, this is one place I'm going to tell you to pump the brakes a little bit, because I can tell you from firsthand experience, you can go down the rabbit hole and end up spending more time on this side project than you're spending on your main project. And that's something that's happened to me a few times. So would I want to do an audiobook of Evil Inc.? Maybe. It sounds great when you first think of it. Hey, I'll just read my comic, until you actually try and do it. And I've tried to do it. And all of a sudden, all the stuff that you've drawn, now that you've got to describe, right? All the motions, all the activities, all the scenes. Now you've got to describe them if you're going to do it in an audio only presentation. And holy cats, you can't just do that on the fly. You're going to have to sit down and write that script out. Then you're either going to have to read it if you've got a good enough voice and good enough ability to do that, or hire that out. Now you've gotten into a whole can of worms, okay? For, let's face it, questionable return in terms of, are you going to get a return on investment off of an audiobook? It's questionable whether that's actually going to happen. And on the flip side, doing this for promotion, we see an awful lot of comics artists, especially as Instagram is going more and more video friendly. We see a lot of comics artists that are trying to reinvent their static comic images into something that incorporates motion so that they can get noticed by the Instagram algorithm, and also TikTok. And video has always done really well on the other social media like Twitter and Facebook. So they're trying to go to video. Again, to do it well, to do it really, really well, you're going to have to start learning video editing software. If you're going to be doing voiceovers, it's that whole thing again. And are you really getting that much of a return on investment for it? For promotion, it's a little bit bigger. Again, I'm going to have you pump the brakes there and ask yourself, as you're doing this, I want you to really keep track of the time that you're putting into it, because it can be a distraction. And unless you're getting one hell of an ROI, it's not a good distraction. You can take your eye off the ball, and your ball is doing a good comic. What do you think, Dave?
It's funny. I had a more joy-filled response in terms of loving audio plays. No. This is for real. I come from more of a theatrical background, Brad, where I did sketch comedy, I did theater, I did monologue shows, I did all sorts of stuff like that, right? And so there's a tiny part of me that is, even though I'm just so at voices, I could see the joy of wanting to make an audio play of your book. I guess what I'm saying is I get it. That seems fun to me. I could see why that would be fun, especially if you have pals that are good with voiceover work. You'd want to make an audiobook or a radio play. But So now I've said that I can see the fun in it, but here's the thing.
Yeah.
I do agree with Brad that in some ways I think it is more distraction than it is additive to your overall career. And I think, if I'm being honest with it, the desire to do an audio play might come from the fact that the comic that you're currently putting out is not getting the response that you want. And so you're like, what else can I do to jazz the reaction? I got to get more of a reaction. And the painful truth is, getting continuously better at cartooning years over years and working on it is going to bring more of a response that you want, rather than a very different art form. If we're honest about it, it's a very different art form of audio plays. I don't know that that's not a desperate leap to the other, to try to make this current thing work rather than just working on the current thing. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, and it's very easy to take a look at audiobooks, and it's that whole, again, we mentioned Dunning-Kruger, and I know there's a lot of Dunning-Kruger that was disproven, but I'm using it. Please allow me the latitude to use that phrase colloquially to get across that idea. But we see a lot of Dunning-Kruger in that. In other words, since we don't know at all what it takes to do a good audiobook, we just saying, I'll just record and I'll put an audiobook out and it'll be great, because I don't have the slightest clue what it takes to do a good audiobook. In the same way, Dave, that you and I get a little bit upset when we hear somebody saying, well, listen, they turned down my screenplay, so I'm going to do it as a comic, right? And you go, wait a minute. Doing comics is something that people spend decades learning how to do well. I'm still on my journey trying to learn how to do it well. And so are the rest of us. This person that says, well, my writing wasn't very good, so I decided to do it as a comic. My writing wasn't getting leverage, wasn't taking root. And so I've decided to do it as a comic. And we look at those people saying, what made you think that doing it as a comic was going to be any better, right? Either you got to focus on the writing either way in that case. It's so easy to say, well, this other thing is much better. And I think, Dave, you hit it right on the head when you said sometimes when we're feeling stuck in the comic and we aren't getting that leverage, it's very easy to do this other thing that we know nothing about, but we're convinced that we could do that. And then that might be the thing that starts the ball rolling again.
It's also, if we're being honest about it, it's the shiny new object.
Yes.
And I suffer from this all the time, where really at a moment where I'm supposed to be buckling down and continuing the actual thing that I'm doing and getting better at it, I'm distracted by the shiny new object. I'm like, I want to do, and I'll spend way too much time on the shiny new object rather than doing the work. And so, and then I want to focus in too on the specific TikTok and Instagram thing of doing voiceovers. I think you and I can all admit that could require less work than a more polished audio play, because TikTok, if anything, has an odd sort of culture of rewarding amateurism in a way that, like, it's a whole generation of kids that grew up being sold to. And so they kind of, at least on TikTok, seem to respect something that still works as a joke or still works as a bit, but is clearly just 5 friends doing something on TikTok. Right. And so, so it does allow for a little bit more amateurism in voiceover. But again, and I know I've said this in the past, I want to be a cartoonist. I don't want to be a voiceover artist for a motion graphic comic that's being displayed on Instagram and TikTok. That's subjective. You might be super comfortable with it. You might find it to be a really fun outlet for you. It's something that doesn't exist anywhere else in your life. Hey, look at me. I get to be, a little bit of an extrovert with my voiceover work on my comics. But for me, it's not what I want to do. And so if Instagram and TikTok aren't fulfilling my needs as getting the word out on my comic, that's a very different question than, I guess I need to change what I do to make it work within this medium. You know what I mean? If they're leaning towards video, and they are, that's a very different question than, does Dave Kellett need to make a motion graphic voiceover audio of every show that he does? I don't want to do that. Just because it's working for Instagram and TikTok and their business model doesn't mean I have to do it. I just have to find different ways of getting my comic out there. That was a longer walk than I needed to be, but I think you get the point, Brad.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, I think what we're saying is it would be very understandable if someone wanted to use motion graphics, video, voiceover, or just straight up audio to try and promote their comic. And if you want to experiment with that, by all means do. I think our number one advice to you is to just keep track of the return on investment and the amount of time that you're putting into it, because it could be very easy to get distracted and lose track of why you're doing this stuff in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really true. I'll tell on Brad and I that, much like Brad has a really famous comic in the history of his comics where there's an editor that says, hey, I need you to Photoshop. Brad knows the dialogue better than I do.
Yeah.
Hey, I need you to upscale Photoshop this image. And the graphic designer's like, this only has 2 pixels in it. And the Brad, you tell the punchline because you know better.
And then the editor goes, well, just Photoshop it. Don't you know how to Photoshop it? Just put it into Photoshop and Photoshop it. How come nobody knows how to Photoshop it? And that's pretty much it.
Right, but it's only got the point being, it's only got 2 pixels to upscale. Yeah. And so I feel a little bit like cartoonists, again, Dunning-Kruger, that we're like, well, audiobook, how hard can it be? There's you turn on a microphone and you go, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'll be honest, I'll tell on Brad and I, our wonderfully talented and super knowledgeable editor, Matt, has really had to handhold us through both microphone purchases, software to install, how to approach the mic, because we're noobs at it. And we, even to this day, don't know a lot about audio, even after doing this for at least twice a week for 5 years now. And it's we still have a ton of stuff to learn.
And what's worse, we didn't know what we didn't know. And sometimes that's the worst stuff to know, is you don't know what you don't know. There's only one thing that I know when it comes to doing audio. And I guess I could just tell you right now, is after you've done a good solid 1-hour show, it's time to tell people that you've been listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
I got to tell you, your hosts have been my friend Brad Guigar, the editor of webcomics.com and the new host at the Scotch Whiskey Heritage Center. Look for him starting on Wednesday. He's also the creator of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my close personal friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of the comics documentary Stripped, and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And the ComicLab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by the very talented Matt Woodard, who we are so appreciative of all his efforts and talents, over at Woodsong Production at www.woodsong.media.
If you love ComicLab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, where we are a top-rated comics podcast. Thank you. Thanks to all of our listeners giving us those 5-star reviews. And if you post a review, you may even hear your review featured on a future episode.
And just speaking of Spotify, Brad, I checked it this morning, both for the word comic and comics, and ComicLab is still the #1 podcast on Spotify, in front of a bunch of Marvel and DC podcasts, and I love this. Brad, the chuffing over here. I'm feeling so chuffed, so suitably chuffed. Anyway, ComicLab is made possible by your support at patreon.com/ComicLab, so we'll go ahead and say that twice, patreon.com/ComicLab. I didn't even think about this, the synchronicity of that we did an audio play in a show where we're like, maybe don't do an audio play.
Yeah, don't get all carried away with yourself.
Hey, slow it down over there. Meanwhile, tune in next week when Brad and I do another audio play.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, literally, I was searching through my email inbox to see other things that we could play.
Ego, heal thyself, right?
Yes.